Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. An Australian jury has found Erin Patterson guilty of murdering her husband's parents and aunt by lacing a beef Wellington with toxic mushrooms. The deadly 2023 lunch in Morwell shocked Australia and made global headlines as details of the case unfolded. At least 82 people have died in flash floods across the Guadalupe River over the July the 4th weekend, Texas officials have said. Rescuers are still searching for missing girls from a summer camp as questions grow over the state's response. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Trump may take a victory lap over their joint strikes on Iran, but face questions on ending the Gaza war. As they meet for the third time this year, the pair will be pressed on how far Trump will go to push for a ceasefire with Hamas. The latest indirect ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas ended without a breakthrough after hours in Doha, a Palestinian official has stated. Netanyahu says his discussions with Trump could help advance a hostage deal this week, with negotiators set to resume talks today. Ukrainian officials say Russian attacks across Sumy, Odessa and Kherson have killed at least 4 people and injured over 30. Kiev accuses Moscow of targeting civilian areas, causing widespread damage and more casualties. US President Trump has vowed to slap an extra 10% tariff on countries aligning with BRICS, calling the group's policies anti-American. Posting on Truth Social, he warned there would be no exceptions for the bloc that includes Brazil, Russia, India and China. BRICS leaders condemn attacks on Gaza and Iran and call for reforms to global institutions, positioning the bloc as a diplomatic haven. Brazilian President Lula drew parallels to the Cold War non-aligned movement. As Chinese President Xi skipped the conference, Putin joined online and Modi and Rafamosa attended in person. Israel says it hit 3 ports and a power plant in Houthi-controlled Yemen after warning civilians to evacuate ahead of airstrikes. Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the targets included the hijacked Galaxy leadership, vowing the Houthis will continue to pay a heavy price. Now for our top story, we head to the United States, where the deadly flash floods in central Texas have now claimed at least 82 lives, and officials fear that number may still rise. Kerr County alone accounts for 68 fatalities, including 28 children, mostly from the devastated Camp Mystic Girls River Camp. The missing toll stands at now 41, including 10 campers still unaccounted for, as rescue teams work around the clock in hopes of finding survivors. Governor Greg Abbott warned of more life-threatening rain through Tuesday, with flash flood alerts still active across the region. The breakdown of confirmed deaths includes as follows. Kerr County now have 68, Travis County now has a tally of 6, Burnett County 4, Kendall County 2, Tom Green and Williamson County each 1. And President Trump has also signed a major disaster declaration for Kerr County and said that he may visit the area on Friday. Trump called the scene, quote, absolutely horrible, and said, God bless all those who have gone through so much. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama also offered condolences. Bush's wife Laura, a former Camp Mystic counselor, said they were holding up our fellow Texans who are hurting. But the disaster also sparked questions, with criticism over understaffing and budget cuts at the National Weather Service. The White House fiercely denied those claims, calling reports of staff shortages disgusting and politically motivated. As questions mount, Kerrville City officials have promised a full review of the emergency response. But tonight, the priority remains on finding the missing, as first responders, volunteers and families hold on to hope. We're now joined by Glenn Grant, who's an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defence Minister. He joins us live from Riga, Latvia, to comment on this situation further. Glenn, Donald Trump has responded to this tragedy and said he is extremely sorry. He also hasn't confirmed that he will visit the affected areas, but said that he might and is thinking of it. Do you think these questions over emergency response and budget cuts under the Department of Government Efficiency are acceptable? Also, Donald Trump's climate stance is very well known. Do you think that this situation will cause more questions to be asked over that?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the neutral commentators say that this couldn't have been forecast in the way that it was, and that also that they do not see that there was anything out of ordinary in terms of the actual warnings coming. The trouble with this sort of area, Texas always gets bad weather. And this southern part, of course, being close to the Gulf, gets particularly bad weather because you remember the hurricanes come round there regularly. And where these rivers start is in very, very narrow valleys, which means that if there's heavy rain, it just drops down into the valley and whoosh, down it comes, and which it did. So you know, they got trouble. They got trouble. Now, I don't think in cases like that you can actually respond any quicker than they seem to respond for this. I mean, there were people on the ground immediately. So I think that any comments, I'm inclined to agree that any comments are a bit political. You can't do much when a river rises 29 feet. I mean, I've seen rivers that have risen half of that in UK, and there's nothing anybody can do.
Yes, Glenn, I just want to play some visuals now before we move on to our next story. As you've mentioned, the 29 feet that the river rose in such a short amount of time, causing so much catastrophic damage and tragedy across the region. As you're seeing, we're playing those visuals right now. Scenes, very tragic scenes, and the scale of the power of the water, as we can see there now. We now move on to our next story. We will continue to bring you every single update that we can in that developing situation in Texas. Now we move on. The leaders of the growing BRICS group are gathering in Brazil for a summit overshadowed by United States President Donald Trump's new tariff policies, global wars, while presenting the bloc as a defender of multilateralism. BRICS leaders condemned recent US and Israeli strikes on Iran, the war in Gaza, and NATO's role in strongly worded joint statements. The BRICS leaders condemned military strikes on Iran, calling them a violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. Let's listen in to what the host Brazilian President Lula da Silva had to say.
O governo brasileiro denunciou as violações à integridade territorial do Irã, como já havia feito no caso da Ucrânia. É urgente que as partes envolvidas na guerra na Ucrânia aprofundem o diálogo direto com vistas a cessar-fogo.
In addition, the bloc criticised the escalating violence in Gaza and pushed for sweeping reforms in global governance institutions. This is what Lula said on the Gaza situation.
Absolutamente nada justifica as ações terroristas perpetradas pelo Hamas. Mas não podemos permanecer indiferentes ao genocídio praticado em Israel, por Israel em Gaza, e a matança indiscriminada de civis inocentes e o uso da fome como arma de guerra. A solução desse conflito só será possível com o fim da ocupação israelense e com o estabelecimento de um Estado palestino soberano dentro das fronteiras de 1967.
BRICS also slammed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for its increased defense spending. Brazilian president said that this would fuel an arms race. Let's take a listen in.
A recente decisão da OTAN alimenta a corrida armamentista. É mais fácil destinar 5% do PIB para gastos militares do que alocar os 0,7% prometidos para assistência oficial do desenvolvimento. Isso evidencia que os recursos para implementar a Agenda 2030 existem, mas não estão disponíveis por falta de prioridade política.
With the G7 and G20 divided, BRICS expansion is offering an alternative diplomatic platform for the global south, one that is gaining momentum amid growing tensions with the West. We're once again joined by Glenn Grant. He joins us live from Riga, Latvia once again. Glenn, this BRICS summit has certainly made some noise, positioning itself as a voice of the global south and not and not NATO, as some would call one of the Western powers. What are your thoughts on some of the comments coming out of BRICS and also the response by Donald Trump? We're talking criticism of the Iranian, the strikes on Iran. We're talking President Lula da Silva there calling very blatantly Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide. And then we're talking about Donald Trump's response also of which he has slapped now a 10% tariff. He said he is going to slap a 10% tariff on these countries for not aligning with quote-unquote American values. What are your thoughts, Glenn?
Well, I think the first thing is, I mean, BRICS is growing in, you might say, in power and status, but it has a serious credibility issue. I mean, you cannot, as an organization, talk about, show disgust, you might say, for what Hamas is doing and what's going on in the world, if at the same time, inside your membership, you don't mention Ukraine because you have Russia. And you don't mention what Iran is doing because Iran is a member. And I think that the BRICS itself needs to actually to understand that this credibility issue. And they also, of course, have internal tensions, with things like China and India against each other. So that's the first thing. I mean, the call, for example, by Putin for, a change from the liberal values, or that the liberal values are dying, doesn't bear any strength of evidence when you actually look at the economies of those liberal countries. And then you have Trump with his comment about American values. Well, leave that to one side with American values at the moment. What Trump is doing is what Trump wants to do. And I don't think that we can sort of lump that together with anything to do with BRICS, because Trump is doing this sort of tariff action against everybody. So it's not just against the global south or against the BRICS countries.
Yes, thank you very much, Glenn. We have more information coming at our viewers now. India scored a diplomatic win at the latest BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro. Leaders backed new action on counter-terrorism and supported India's push for UN Security Council reforms. The summit declaration strongly condemned the April terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir that killed 26 civilians. BRICS called for tougher global steps against cross-border terrorism, including sanctuaries, financing and safe haven. The group also urged the UN to fast-track its long-pending counter-terror convention. On trade, BRICS slammed rising global tariffs without naming the US, but clearly criticising President Trump's policies. The declaration called those moves coercive, warning they threaten global supply chains. The leaders also pushed for UNSC reforms, backing India, Brazil and South Africa for permanent seats. BRICS says the Security Council must reflect today's world, not post-war power structures. For India, the summit marks a major step in its global agenda. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Lula da Silva stressed the urgent need for global cooperation amid rising trade tensions. He warned that protectionism deepens inequality for developing nations and urged reforms to the World Trade Organization to ensure fair obligations and rights for all member countries. Let's take a listen in to what the Brazilian president said once again.
E o crescimento do protecionismo cria uma situação de assimetria insustentável para os países em desenvolvimento. não será possível restabelecer a confiança no OMC sem promover um equilíbrio justo de obrigações e direitos que reflita adequadamente os interesses de todos os seus membros. Enquanto o unilateralismo cria barreiras ao comércio, nosso bloco trabalha por sistemas de pagamento transfronteiriços mais rápidos, baratos.
Glenn, we did just briefly discuss the tariff situation. However, on trade, BRICS didn't obviously name the US directly, but they clearly took aim at Donald Trump's tariff policies. You mentioned the credibility of BRICS also briefly there, but this summit seems to have made a lot of noise. How much does BRICS really have to push back against protectionism, especially concerning the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because of course, if you create an organization that really whose whole basis is against another country, because it's not pro each other, because if it had values inside, then India would be complaining bitterly about having Russia inside BRICS, because India goes to counterterrorism or against terrorism, and Russia is doing that. So it's this credibility thing. And if these countries actually want tariffs to drop, then they've got to work with what is going on in you call it the liberal world, rather than against it, because against it just actually creates more problems for them than it does solutions.
Yes, Glenn, thank you very much. We have some more updates once again. Russian President Vladimir Putin has declared that the era of liberal globalization is over. Speaking virtually to BRICS leaders in Rio de Janeiro, Putin said the future belongs to emerging markets, not Western-led economic models. He urged BRICS countries to boost trade in national currencies and expand cooperation in natural resources, logistics and finance. Putin's appearance was via video link as he faces an ICC arrest warrant over alleged war crimes in Ukraine. Moscow has rejected the warrant as meaningless and politically motivated. BRICS now includes 11 members and represents 45% of the world's population, with China alone making up over 60% of the group's economic power. According to the IMF, BRICS economies total over $28 trillion, while the G7 accounts for $51 trillion. Putin's message was very clear. The global economic balance is shifting east and south. Let's take a listen in to what the Russian President Putin has said to the summit.
Мы все видим, что в мире происходят кардинальные изменения. Уходит в прошлое однополярная система международных отношений, обслуживавшая интересы так называемого «золотого миллиарда». И на смену идет более справедливый, многополярный мир. Процесс смены мирового экономического уклада продолжает набирать обороты. Все свидетельствует о том, что модель либеральной глобализации изживает себя. Центр деловой активности смещается в сторону развивающихся.
Glenn, how serious is Putin's claim that liberal globalization is finished, and does the data back him up, do you think?
Doesn't. I mean, this is him hoping and trying to actually to maintain some sort of leadership within BRICS by making claims that really can't be justified. Yes, of course, Asia is growing at a fundamentally monstrous rate in terms of economy. But there again, you have to look at how these things play out in the world. I mean, how many things are you buying in most countries from Indonesia, for example? And the answer is nothing. So, world trade still revolves around effectively those liberal countries that he's complaining about. So I think he's throwing things into the air, but they're not actually real in terms of what is physically going on in the world.
Yes, thank you very much, Glenn. We now have our final update. The BRICS bloc formally welcomed Indonesia as its newest member and admitted 10 countries as partner nations during its 17th summit on Sunday. The partner countries include Belarus, Bolivia, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Uganda, Vietnam and Uzbekistan, in a move seen as a major expansion of the bloc's global influence. The joint declaration also highlighted key initiatives, a framework on climate change, a statement on AI governance, and a partnership to eliminate socially determined diseases. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, speaking at the summit's Peace and Security session, said BRICS' expansion showed its ability to evolve. We are once again joined by Glenn to get these final updates. What do you think of these main messages of the BRICS summit, Glenn? Do you finally think the expanded BRICS can deliver on its promise to bridge divides on issues like trade, technology and security, AI, climate change, etc., in an increasingly fragmented world?
Well, your last line is the interesting one, because of course now you've got an increasingly fragmented BRICS, because it has no common values except hate for America and possibly Israel as well. It's interesting because the internal tensions within BRICS, as it grows, yes, it is becoming more powerful. Yes, it can become more influential. But then those internal tensions of are people going to work together, and cooperation is one of the main BRICS tenets. Are they going to work together, or are we just going to see China actually trying to use the fact that it's in BRICS to gain more power, strength and money for itself? And I think that the jury is out on all of those. BRICS is an informal organization, and an informal organization is exactly as it says, informal. And there are very few things that actually hold. I mean, tell me what Belarus has got in agreement with Russia, and the answer is nothing. Or Belarus and Ethiopia, and the answer is nothing. So when you don't have values like that, it's an extremely difficult thing to see how someone can progress forward in terms of both economy and values when those values are fractured completely inside the organization.
Glenn, thank you so much for joining. Some very interesting points there. Thank you very much for your insight and joining us on the programme. We now move over to the Middle East for our next story, where Israel has launched strikes on 3 ports and a power plant in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, including Hudaydah, Ras Isa and Saif. The Israel Defense Minister, Israel Katz, confirmed the strikes targeted the Galaxy Leader, a commercial vessel hijacked by Houthis in 2023, which Israel claims was being used to monitor ships and support terror operations in the Red Sea. The operation, named Black Flag, was a direct response to what Israel calls repeated Houthi missile launches against Israeli territory. Shortly after the strikes, 2 missiles were fired towards Israel, prompting air raid silence across several regions. Israeli military officials say the interception results are still under review. Israel claims the targeted ports were being used to transfer Iranian weapons to Houthi fighters. Among the sites hit were the Ras Kanatib power station, which supplies electricity to IBB and Tayaz. The Houthi military said its air defences responded with a large number of locally made missiles. Hudaydah port, a crucial entry for humanitarian aid, has also been struck multiple times in recent months. Katz also warned that the Houthis and their backers will continue to, quote, pay a heavy price for targeting Israel, adding that anyone who raises a hand against Israel will have their hand cut off. We're joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne, who's an international affairs expert. He joins us live from Singapore to discuss this in further detail. Professor Gunaratne, thank you very much for joining us. How big of an escalation is this for Israel to hit these ports and also a power station inside Yemen? We have seen strikes go back and forth from each side. Majority of the time, the Houthi missiles is intercepted by the Israeli Iron Dome. Could this open a new dangerous front beyond Gaza and Lebanon?
Thomas, the Israeli attack on 3 ports in Yemen and also the attack on Galaxy Leader is a very significant attack because of two reasons. One is that the Houthis have been constantly firing missiles at Israel. And Israel ran out of patience, but Israel has planned very well for this operation. Netanyahu is on his way to the United States to meet Trump, and this will be one of the key discussions. But going back to Yemen, I want to tell you that Iran has been providing the missile capabilities, and the Israelis are very concerned whether Iran will provide their latest missile technology that had a very significant impact on the Iran-Israel war. So Israel is keen to ensure that Houthis do not maintain the capabilities either to receive Iranian missiles or to manufacture those missiles. The Houthis have developed, with Iran's assistance, some capability to produce about 2 to 10 missiles every week. And these attacks were targeted not only against the ports, against the Galaxy leader, but also against the Houthi military infrastructure.
Rohan, we've obviously heard where these significant Israeli strikes have hit. One being the Hodeidah port, a key entry for aid. I want to just reiterate to our viewers that the Houthis are an Iran-backed proxy group. They are a rebel group. Yemen, however, is facing a humanitarian situation. What does striking this crucial port, the Hodeidah port, mean for the humanitarian situation currently going on in Yemen, Professor Gunaratne?
Thomas, you raised a very important point. The humanitarian crisis will worsen because of the level of poverty in Yemen, but Houthi regime will have to take the responsibility for it because they cannot attack the ships in the Red Sea as they did attack yesterday. Magic Seas. So I want to tell you that the Yemeni people are aware that these attacks are in retaliation, in response to the Houthi missile attacks against Israel and ship in the Red Sea yesterday.
Professor Rohan Gunaratne, thank you for joining us. You are staying with us for more updates from the West Asian region. We now move on. Turkish President Erdogan is set to meet lawmakers from the pro-Kurdish Democratic Party in talks described as historic by jailed PKK founder Abdullah Öcalan. The meeting follows a visit by Dem leaders to Imrali Island, where Öcalan has been held since 1999. The delegation reported a productive 2.5-hour meeting and said Öcalan expressed strong support for the talks, calling for a parliamentary commission to help guide the peace process. He stressed the importance of all parties playing their role in this new phase of reconciliation. The meeting with Erdogan comes as the PKK prepares to hold a ceremony in Iraqi Kurdistan to begin destroying a first tranche of weapons, expected to take place around July the 10th to the 12th. The disarmament follows the group's formal announcement in May that it was ending its decades-long armed struggle. President Erdogan has welcomed the move and said that it could give momentum to broader peace efforts between the government and the Kurdish community. We're once again joined by Professor Gunaratne to discuss this in further detail. Professor, how credible is the PKK's promise to destroy these weapons this week? And how much trust is there that this disarmament will actually happen on the ground?
PKK, or the Kurdish Workers' Party, led by Abdullah Öcalan, who is now in custody in the Imrali prison, has been fighting a relentless war against the Turkish government. And Turkey has been very successful in negotiating an agreement with him for PKK to disarm. I only hope that this will take place as scheduled because it will be a game changer in the fight against terrorism. Like the Egyptian groups, the Libyan groups, the groups in Indonesia, Jamaah Islamiyah, they all dissolved, they disarmed and dissolved. It is important for the world to consider not only fighting a group, but also negotiations, discussions, so that, and also pressure on the leader. I'm saying Öcalan is in a prison for so many years now. So all that is important, transform these groups, because these groups cannot be decimated. They can only be transformed and dismantled through both military and political as well as diplomatic means. And Turkey should be congratulated for this effort.
Yes, Professor Rohan Gunaratne. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for your insight. We now move on and over to the Indo-Pacific, where Typhoon Danis has hit southern Taiwan, unleashing record winds and heavy rain, killing 2 people and injuring over 330. The rare storm struck the island's densely populated west coast, causing significant disruption. While Taiwan is frequently impacted by typhoons, most of them land on the sparsely populated east coast. Danis, classified as the second strongest typhoon by Taiwan's weather authority, made landfall late on the 6th of July on the southwestern coast and has since weakened. However, President Lai Ching-te has urged civilians to prepare for further impacts. More than 500,000 homes lost power and over 300 flights were cancelled. Rail services were reduced as well. The storm's toll included 1 fatality from a falling tree and another from a malfunctioning respirator during a power outage. Record winds of around 220 kilometers per hour were recorded in the southwestern county of Yulin, where more than 700 trees and street signs were blown across western cities and towns. As of this morning, 121 passenger vessels and 64 ferry routes had been suspended across the province. According to the China Meteorological Administration, Danis is expected to gradually approach the coastal areas in neighbouring Fujian province. As per local authorities, the typhoon is forecast to make landfall along the stretch late on July the 8th. We'll bring you all the updates in that developing story. Now we move over to Australia, where in a verdict that has gripped both the nation and the world, Erin Patterson has been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder after hosting a lunch that left 3 of her relatives dead. They were all poisoned by death cap mushrooms hidden in a home-cooked beef Wellington. The 12-member jury reached the decision after 6 days of deliberation following a 10-week trial in Morwell, Victoria, not far from the quiet dining room in Longartha, where the fatal meal was served in July of 2023. Those killed including Patterson's former in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, and Gail's sisters, Heather Wilkinson. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, a local pastor, miraculously survived after weeks of intensive care. Prosecutors argued that Patterson had deliberately added the toxic mushrooms, allegedly picked after she found their location on a public foraging website. They painted a picture of calculated intent supported by inconsistencies in Patterson's statements and her initial refusal to cooperate with police. Patterson's defence team claimed the poisoning was a terrible accident, suggesting she panicked and lied out of fear when she realised she might have used foraged mushrooms in the dish. In Australia, jurors are never identified and their deliberations remain sealed forever. But what's clear is that all 12 agreed unanimously that the evidence met the legal bar of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Today's verdict finally brings legal closure to a story that began with a Sunday family lunch and ended in 3 tragic deaths. Suriname has elected its first women president. Jennifer Simmons, a doctor and former parliamentary speaker, was backed by lawmakers on Sunday following a tightly contested election. She takes office as Suriname stands on the brink of a major oil boom. Simons was chosen through a coalition deal after her party won 18 seats, just one ahead of President Chan Santokhi's ruling party. Surinam's president is elected indirectly by the National Assembly, which approved Simons by acclamation. In her first speech, Simons promised to serve all citizens with a focus on youth and the underprivileged. Santokhi conceded defeat, taking responsibility for failures in protecting the most vulnerable. The new government will oversee a coming wave of energy revenue as the Grand Morwell oil project led by Total Energy's production in 2028. Simons will be sworn in on July the 6th. Now we move over to Europe, where King Charles has issued a moving message marking 20 years since the 7/7 terror attacks in London, calling for unity against those who seek to divide. In his statement, the King described the bombings as senseless acts of evil and expressed his deep sympathy for the 52 lives lost and more than 700 injured. He said the events of the day underscored the importance of building a society where people of all backgrounds live together in mutual respect. Special commemorations included a national service at St Paul's Cathedral that will be held in honour of the victims, with the Duke of Edinburgh representing the King. The King also paid tribute to the heroism of first responders and the compassion shown by ordinary people in the aftermath of the attacks. He said his special prayers remain with those lives who were forever changed on that terrible summer's day. Survivors still bearing physical and psychological scars. A long-time advocate for interfaith dialogue, King Charles, has said while the horrors of 7/7 will never be forgotten, the unity and strength that followed showed the resilience of London and the nation. Now we take a look at some updates from the sporting world. Australia has sealed a series win over the West Indies with a dominant 133-run victory in the second test in Grenada. After setting a tough target of 277, Australia dismissed the host in just over 34 overs, taking an unassailable 2-0 lead in the 3-match series. Mitchell Starc took 3 wickets, while Nathan Lyon ended with 3 for 42, now just 1 wicket behind legendary Glenn McGrath on the all-time list. Australia will look to complete a clean sweep next week in Jamaica. NBA superstar Kevin Durant has officially joined the Houston Rockets in a record-breaking 7-team trade. The blockbuster deal involves 13 players and multiple future draft picks, the largest trade in NBA history. Durant leaves the Phoenix Suns after scoring over 30,000 career points and winning 2 titles with Golden State. Houston also picks up Clint Capella from Atlanta, while the Suns receive young talents including Carman Mulakak and Julen Green. Durant says he's excited for his next chapter in Houston. Lando Norris claimed his first ever British Grand Prix win in a dramatic race at Silverstone. The McLaren driver celebrated despite suffering a bloody nose when his trophy hit his face during celebrations. Teammate Oscar Piastri finished second, but on the track was handed a controversial 10-second penalty for a safety car restart infraction. The win cuts Norris's points gap to Piastri to just 8, with the McLaren drivers dominating throughout the weekend. F1 now heads into a 2-week break before the season resumes in Belgium. Wimbledon officials have apologised after a technical error disabled the electronic line calling system on centre court. The malfunction led to 3 missed calls during Anastasia Polavernichekova's match against Sonny Kartel. 1 missed out call prompted the Russian to stop play, but umpire Nico Hellworth ruled the point be replayed instead. Polichikova called it a stolen game, though she later won that match. The incident fuels growing player concerns over Wimbledon's automated line call system, now used without challenged rights. World number one Magnus Carlsen has won the Super United Rapid Blitz Croatia tournament in Zagreb, despite saying he was in survival mode in the world of chess. After trailing Gukesh by 4 points in the rapid section, Carlsen stormed back in blitz to win by 2.5 points. The chess star said he struggled to find form in a tough field, saying his play old man chess. Carlsen's wife, Ella, watched from the front row and joked that he tried to lose but just couldn't. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.